Hi folks, thanks for having me. I know it's after lunch, so I figured I would wake you up with some lights and sirens. No, just kidding, we're not actually gonna do that. But as Courtney said, you can see I used to work on an ambulance. I was trained in search and rescue. I got to respond to a number of real world emergencies. I worked in ER for a short time in various positions, and later on when I went to technology, did SRE work and stuff, and I couldn't get this idea out of my head that I'd learned to respond to emergencies. It seemed like that this was something that at the time didn't quite get caught up in software yet. Some of these things that I had learned, that I'd had others teach me, that kind of felt like known things. So I go and I have the opportunity to work with teams and talk to them about how is it that they can hopefully better and easier respond to emergencies. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is I don't want you to read the title or hear that I worked in medicine or anything like that to hear me saying that this is in any way easy. Don't let anyone tell you that. Being on call, it doesn't matter what for, being on call is hard. I'm hopefully gonna leave you with some things that are gonna make your life easier. But as a general rule, being on call is hard. It doesn't matter that, maybe it's not an ambulance. Sometimes you'll hear people say from the stage, they'll say things like, well, no one's gonna get hurt, no one's gonna do this. Well, that doesn't change the human cost of being woken up at 3 a.m., right? The limbic system in your brain does not know the difference between that obnoxious pager duty sound and some other emergency. Your body adjusts and treats that as an emergency. Our brains are not so discrete and discriminate that there's no pathway in your brain that goes, oh, that's just pager duty. They haven't found that part of the brain yet. So don't believe people when they say, oh, well, it's not a big deal or it's not hard. There is a human cost to that. Also, I draw this parallel because we hear, so much in SRE about these different forms of emergency response. We hear about aviation, nuclear power, and I love these stories. I do. But actually, I think that incident response in software is really, really, really a lot closer to the ambulance model than pretty much any other. And I think as we go on, you'll see some parallels. I mean, to start with, we were technically using ICS. There were two of us. We showed up to an incident. We got paged. That page was sometimes correct about the information. Sound familiar, right? We had to just show up to whatever it was. We never knew, just like you folks. We never knew what we were getting into. Okay, something is down oftentimes. Sometimes that's all we get. Sometimes we show up and it's something completely different. And oftentimes it starts with just one or two of us. It might grow rapidly, but so much of the time it starts much closer to that, hey, something saw something wrong and called somebody. Whether that's automated or that Slack message that we both love and hate, hey, this looks weird. Somehow someone triggered the alarm. Now, my goal today is to leave you folks with something that you can go home with, go to your organization with, and do today. We got to hear from Amy at the beginning about the end game of SRE. We got to hear from Kelly about the roots of resilience. We got to hear from Matt about what happens when we treat incident response as a band, as our jazz group. What happens if we don't even feel like we have a plant to water? What if we haven't even picked up the instrument? And so often I think that that's really where a lot of our teams, because a lot of this stuff is unevenly distributed, a lot of our teams, maybe our organization as a whole, is in this situation. So I'm gonna talk to you folks about leveling up. And so to do that, this focus on actually doing, I want to start off with a quote from the great Dr. Richard Cook. You do not learn how to ice skate by reading a book about ice skating. So keep that in mind as we go. I'm going to encourage you to take some of the things I'm going to tell you today and start a practice immediately. Now later when you go home, you might be like, well, Ty didn't mean immediately. He meant in a couple of weeks when I finish these OKRs and all right. No, immediately, really. It's too easy to put off, and the sooner you get started, the easier it will be. And of course, I mean, this wouldn't be SREcon. I have to, right? Like, I think I get kicked out if I don't do this, right? So I'm gonna try to say it depends as little as possible. This is hopefully gonna be the last one of this talk. I think we all know this. We know that sometimes, whomever's up here, our organization does not look like theirs. We know there's variance. If there weren't variance in our work, we'd probably be bored. And if there weren't variance, all this would have been solved and we'd go home, right? We know this part. We know that it depends. So keep that in the back of your mind. I'm going to try to, as a result then, instead of tell you kind of this vague thing with a lot of caveats around it depends, instead what I'm going to try to give you is a seed that you can plant in your own organization. You can take this back and you can plant it and you can grow it and care to it, and as Jessica Kerr says, you can grow to where you're going. Just like most plants, especially trees. When's the best time to plant it, they always say? 20 years ago, second best time is now. And this idea of a seed, I think, can help folks really move beyond some of the things that are getting them stuck. If it's a seed, it means I don't have to get it right the first time because I can grow with it. I can adjust as it grows. I can prune. I can redirect. If you folks are plant folks and there's special words for that, come see me after, I'll learn them, but I don't know. But if this is a seed, then I don't have to get it right the first time. I can plant this organization, I can start in one place, and it can grow and develop and become something we need it to be. And so I think that is really the best way we can benefit our organizations, by cultivating that. So let's lay some groundwork that we're going to plant this seed in. And that ground is going to start with what I'm not talking about. I'm not going to tell you how often to notify your executives. I don't care. If they're the irate VP that we saw in Laura's slide and they want 10 minutes, fine, 10 minutes. If they want 15, fine, 15 minutes. I'm not going to talk to you about severity. I'm not. I know people really like this, but you know something I've never done? I never arrived at a call, someone had a broken arm. We went through lights and sirens, and I went, that doesn't look like a Sev 1. Somehow it never came up. It didn't need to. It didn't need to. So I'm not going to talk about it today. If you followed a lot of this world, ICS, and we'll learn from these different things, you might worry about, who's first in? I'm not going to worry about that either. You don't need to. I'm not going to talk to you about what software you use. I'm going to probably primarily presume that you're doing mostly text-based. If you're doing video or something else, this is going to be easy to adapt. You'll easily see where this changes. But I'm not going to recommend specific software. I think they've left now, but otherwise there was a whole room full of people happy to convince you that their software was the one. That's not going to happen today. And lastly, I'm not going to talk to you about what exactly is and isn't an incident. The problem is, whenever I say that, this happens. But what's an incident? Was the near miss we heard about from Nick, was that an incident? Almost resulted in nuclear war. It kind of feels like the answer is yes. What about this other thing? Is it an incident? So I'm going to help you sidestep that whole concern. Use the incident process when you need more coordination, more help than the way you normally work. It doesn't matter if it's an incident. Oh, well, this 10-year-old Confluence page says this is how we define. It doesn't matter. Use the incident process when you need more support, when you feel that need for help, when you need more coordination. And again, if you notice, there's nothing here about severity. Things don't need to reach some severity level, as we learned from Laura, from Matt, from folks that coordination can happen in all different ways that severity is not coupled to. So I will admit to perhaps tricking you a little bit. In the title of the talk, when I proposed it, I mentioned ICS. And I did that because so many folks are concerned with it. We heard about it from Laura, and so many times people get hung up on this idea that, oh man, someday I'm going to implement all of the ICS and it's going to be great and we're going to be done. This is weird to me because with the exception of our friends at USDS, when did we say, oh great, a giant government bureaucracy with 500 pages of documentation. I want that. Like, why did we decide that this is the government bureaucratic thing that is right for all of us? So we don't need to chase something perfect. We don't need to worry about the perfect ICS. The fun thing is that actually they went and they did a few researchers went out and they looked at the whole country and they said, hey, this ICS thing's been around a while. Wonder how it's working. And they started off with that and they talked to fire departments and ambulance companies and they did all this. And they said, huh, seems to be working okay. The only problem is everybody does it differently. So don't worry about ICS. What I'm going to teach you today, that seed I'm going to give you, can grow into something that is compatible with ICS, is rigorous in that way if you want it. That's the incident command system. And as we've heard from folks, and I'll tell you today, that is probably not the part that you want. We don't need to command. You've heard about conducting. I'll give you another metaphor for that as we go, but we don't really need to worry about that. Also, if you're the type of person who's like, well, I'm going to be a completionist, I'm going to read the whole spec, and then I'm going to know it all, right? The other trick is that actually the National Incident Management System and ICS documentation is self-referential, so technically you can never finish, so good luck. Now, no matter how much you prepare, how well you listen, how perfect your implementation of ICS, you will still be surprised. These techniques in incident response plan, incident management team, none of these things are ways to evade surprise. These things are not going to happen. This is not the way we get out of it. We're going to be surprised. Well, if we're going to be surprised about it, then why bother, right? I'll just show up and see what happens. I don't know. Like, if we're going to be surprised, why bother? Well, as we heard from Matt, that we need to be able to improvise. We heard from Laura about building common ground. Well, the way we do that is by having some of these ideas. If I have a similar idea to what you have, then I know a little bit about what I think you're going to do in a given situation. Makes us work together all that more smoothly. Matt did a great job describing this. That feeling in a band, or that nerve-wracking feeling in traffic that Laura showed us, that where everything is cohesive. We don't get that by just showing up and not having any sort of common ground or experience established. It's only through having some of these shared ideals and shared experiences and experience working together that we really get to have that. So we're still going to be surprised. But when we're surprised and then have that base of kind of that fluid choreography, as Laura told us about, that's when we get to have that effective response. Now, some of you folks might be saying that you may already have an incident response plan. I'm going to venture that everyone does, even if you think you don't. Potentially the problem is that you might have dozens. If you don't have something that folks agree on, something that folks practice, I'm going to venture that you have at least one incident response plan for every engineer. It lives in their head, and it probably changes depending on the situation. So you definitely have a response plan. You may even have it written down. Not to sound like I'm picking on Confluence, but it probably lives in Confluence, sorry. But publishing a document does not make a program. Just as I'm sure Matt would tell me, a sheet of music does not make me a musician, right? I can stare at that all day long, but at no point does it become a performance. Engagement and usage are what make us practitioners. It's what makes a practice. So where do we start that practice? I'm going to suggest that we start with a team view, both as a unit of work and a place to start. I'm going to tell you that if you start here, you don't really need organizational-wide buy-in. If you can get it, great. I don't know about you folks, but I love some of the things I hear about here. But then I hate running into that wall of like, oh yeah, the CEO himself supported us. And it's just like, oh, so that's the hurdle I have to clear? It's really tough. That's not the case here. Starting with our team, an adjacent team, a couple of teams, focusing on the team level lets us start. This lets us also work in, if you do have an incident response sort of plan. Oftentimes I've seen this where our incident response plan is notify the executives every 15 minutes, basically past that we're on our own. The upside to that is we can plant this seed and say, oh, by the way, we're going to do this thing, and notify the executives every 15 minutes. We're still inside of our organizational response plan. But we get the opportunity to understand some of the optimizations that us and our team are going to make. As we've heard from folks over and over and over, we need adaptability. It's going to be required of us. We are the adaptable part of a resilient system. We are the ones who can look at the world, imagine a different world, wonder, ask questions, all that sort of thing. That's us. So this also gives you the opportunity to understand some of those. And as you move from team to team, you'll see some differences and maybe understand some of those as well. So the core of the model is you are wearing 3 hats. If you are paged and you are the first in, you may not know it, you are wearing 3 hats. One of them is the organizer, commander, manager, whomever. This should sound familiar. Hopefully not a commander, or at least not in practice. You can add more than these as you grow, but again, this is a seed. So the organizer, they're helping you be coordinated. And notice I say they're helping. As Laura told us, we can't have just one person do the coordination any more than we can have usually just one person do the Kubernetes, right? That doesn't go well. So, but this is someone who is, has their eye more towards it. They're going to be helping primarily to keep coordinated, help things move forward. Sometimes that's going to be admitting that they need help coordinating, but this is going to be their job. You're going to have someone who's a connector, or if you're feeling fancy, a liaison. They're going to work with other parties. You might wonder what other ones, that's kind of up to you. Sometimes that's internal customers, sometimes that's customer-facing folks, maybe that's the staff, but however you work with other parties, kind of outside of the band, as we call it, or outside of sort of your response team, you're gonna have someone hopefully to help you do that. And again, if you sort of look around the incident and you don't see someone wearing that hat, it's you. You're also going to have an expert or a specialist, someone who is hands on the keyboard, really interacting with the system, pushing the buttons, doing the things like that. Again, if you're woken up in the middle of the night and you're the first one in, you're wearing all these 3. The trick is that since we learned that incident response is a team sport, we want to hand these hats off as soon as we can, keeping the organizer for ourselves. It doesn't really matter to me what you call them, because really, these aren't just roles. We talk about these as roles. As Matt kind of alluded to, these are actually core needs of incident response. We need to connect to the larger world. We need someone with expertise in the system, and we need to stay coordinated for there to be an effective response. This materializes in roles, but these are actually core needs. So if you're wondering, oh, where's the scribe? You can fit it in there if you want, but these are the core needs and thus core roles of incident response. So who fills them? Probably you if you ask that question. An organizer, really almost anyone. An organizer, whoever is conducting the incident, organizing it, moving it forward, does not need to have deep expertise in the part of the system at hand. They need to ideally be patient, have the ability to take a deep breath, stay calm, all learned things, and ask questions and keep the communication open. Connectors, more often than not, it's very rare that I will find a team organization who doesn't already have this role. They just don't realize it. Sometimes it's your customer folks. Sometimes there's other titles available. Chances are you have this role already. We're just asking someone to fill that in the meantime. If you don't have this role, that's fine. Anyone can do it. The point here is that the connector is helping take some of that load away, that cognitive work and the cost of coordination. They're helping to lower it by saying, all that external stuff, I'm going to help and communicate some of that. So the expert person, you probably already have a sense of this. If there's one person who has to approve status page updates, that's probably the person. There's probably someone sitting somewhere who always seems to show up for things or has some weird answer of these different things. And if you don't know who this is, I'm going to suggest that you start trying to find out long before, hopefully, an incident. Talk to people. If you already have some form of review, some form of, drop in on those. Oh, hey, Jane was in this, this incident, and she knew this obscure console thing. Okay, that tells you a bit about who has the expertise. Now, one bit that I also run into that people have trouble with oftentimes is say, we kind of have a plan, but I'm having trouble really getting people on call, or it was fine, and then we have some new people join, and I can't really get them on call. And so sometimes what that looks like is difficulty between solving and organizing. I find this a lot where folks will bring someone in new, give them the pager, and then say, they don't seem very comfortable with it. Well, for one, tech here, it's really the only skill where we say, oh, hey, you write code. Here's a pager. You're in charge of about $1 million more of infrastructure. Good luck. Somehow writing code means that you have the skills to respond to an emergency, I guess. But also, they don't tell people, what does it mean to be on call? Literally, what do I do other than wake up and blearily act pager duty? What do I do? Is my role in that moment to do everything I can to solve this on my own? Or am I simply the human who checks to make sure that this is not an alert that we should have destroyed 3 months ago? Chances are you're going to be somewhere in the middle. You're going to want people to perhaps try a bit on their own and then organize a response. But it's important that you have this conversation with your team or teams. Tell them this. What is expected of them? What do they do at 2 a.m.? Should they, if there are no other resources, should they spend all their time trying to do it? You'd probably be upset if someone was paged and spent an hour on this and had the entire system down. They should have called for help, you would say, maybe, right? But they need to know that this is an option for them. Right about now, especially with engineering folks, they tend to ask a question, and again, as a recovering one, I understand, but does it scale? I'm going to say yes, and there are actually two senses of scaling. If you planted the seed starting with a single team, you can scale in the sense of getting another team to do this. Oftentimes what will happen is a partner team or sibling team will notice, hey, they don't seem quite so frazzled anymore. They seem tired and things after big incidents, but they don't seem quite so frazzled anymore. What are they doing? Sometimes that'll happen on its own. But you also need to be able to scale the people responding to the incident itself. And that's going to be up to who the experts are. As you page or get more people involved, you're going to need to be able to make sure the right people are there. Now, I want to take a moment to say that it's important that you be able to scale down as well. If you woke someone and brought them in, or hopefully if you're within daylight hours, if you're a big enough company, and you find out that actually that PagerDuty service that says database team really has something to do with the HR databases and not actually a DBA. Anyone ever page and have that happen? Yeah. Tell them to get off the call. Let them go back to sleep. You do not need to scale up indefinitely. You can scale down as well. If you don't believe me, it's actually in ICS too that you can scale down. It's just that no one does it. Now, so far, most of this probably sounds pretty reasonable. Good news. I'm going to give you a little bit of good news and bad news. Because when I talk about scaling, folks usually say, well, I know how I'm going to scale. I'm going to write runbooks. We're going to have runbooks because Jane's the expert. I know some things. I'm going to have runbooks. I'm just going to make them write all the things. And then it'll be great. That's how I'm going to scale. The problem, you can't actually document your way to safety. You can't. You cannot policy make your way to safety. You cannot document your way to safety. If you don't believe me, think about all the times you reached for a first aid kit and pushed aside the medical textbook on deck. Oh, wait, you don't get that with a first aid kit, right? That would be a runbook, right? No. No matter how simple we think the task is, the pace and the element of surprise and the nature of an incident fundamentally changes the work. And part of the problem is that runbooks are not really going to work the way you think. Now, the good news about all this is you can stop having that as an action item. If you have an OKR to update the runbooks after every incident, delete it. There you go. You're free. You're free. Be free. But the runbook, it's made about a fictional world. It is made by someone who imagines a future. It is going to be rare that you will find yourself occupying that future. It might even be past you that wrote it. Past you is probably not great, especially in a complex system, of imagining what future you needs. That doesn't mean we don't write things down. Sure, have documentation, write things down. Oftentimes, I find that runbooks are actually really effective for teams to work together. If, say, Nick and I, Courtney and I, we work together and write a runbook, I say, oh, well, step one is to SSH into this thing. Someone said, wait, you SSH into it? I thought we couldn't do that, right? So writing the runbook is more of an activity if you want to do it. It's an activity that you do with your team, and it helps you surface these assumptions. Oftentimes people think, oh, well, the idea of a runbook is that I get to, have this explain everything, and then it'll be easy. Anyone with any experience can do it. The problem is, how do they have the experience to know that, say, step 2 should be skipped, or step 10, or that implicit step 11 is there? You'll never be able to outrun this chase. If your incident response plan is document it and hope, you will never win that race. The next incident will always be there for surprise. It is just a writing about a fictional reality that may or may not come to pass. Runbooks and the creation of are a worthwhile activity as a team to help you understand and surface some of the things that your team is doing. You get to discover adaptation, you get to calibrate, you get to do a lot of great things. That does not necessarily make them effective during an emergency. So I've told you a lot of sort of different rules, different guides, different things. And if you've been listening to all these folks who've been up here before me, you're probably wondering, what about adaptability? If I just kind of blindly do what Ty says, then where does adaptability come in? Well, I hope that I've left you room for it. And this is not intended to constrain adaptation or improvisation. Remember how I said that we were building ground for our seed? Well, how does a plant grow? It grows in both directions. You can veer from these rules in some ways, up, down, however you need to. If you really, really want to upset some of your leadership, point out that procedures do not necessarily create safety, that sometimes breaking rules create safety. If you think that we showed up on an ambulance to who knows what, you put what and where, how long ago, and then busted out our manual and followed exactly the rules for that, that's not what happened. Sometimes breaking the rule, breaking the procedure creates safety. Sometimes knowing it's there and using it as a guide creates safety. The common factor is you folks. We cannot say whether or not a given procedure creates safety. It just doesn't happen. As Matt told us, we can practice, and we have some of our cues, and we have some things like that. But ultimately, when we perform that jazz, we are cueing from each other, from the situation, from all those different things. And ultimately, we need to practice. You're not done because you published a document. There needs to be time and space to practice working together. How do we practice? Could be game days, could be Matt's wheel of misfortune there, could be tabletop exercises, could be other simulations. There's lots of ways for us to practice together. And as Matt reminded us, we're not practicing in the hopes that the next incident matches, although that'd be cool, right? Like, maybe it does. But that's not why we're practicing. We're practicing so that when I'm working with someone, or they're working with me, and I see them deviate from some of the things that we've talked about, oh man, I know something's up. Because Alex does not do that unless something's going down. Or if someone stops talking to me when they're normally, in all the other times we've worked together, they're normally very chatty, oh, I'm worried. I know that they're potentially overloaded. I know this. They don't have to tell me. As we learned from Laura, that's the whole point. They cannot, they can become overwhelmed. They cannot signal you anymore. So it's only by building these things in advance that we can do it. The incidents that we practice are effectively backdrops. We can use different ones. We can use fake ones. We can use non-incidents. Now, I always know I'm talking to engineers when I tell them this part, though. They usually get real excited. They go, yeah, okay, cool. And then they ask me things like this. So how do I do it? Do I replicate dev? Do I spin up a new pod? No, sorry. No, you can sit in a room and talk to people. You can do what Matt told us about and say, tell us about this, show us this, and not just tell us. You can do these different things and learn that if I say, oh, well, in a tabletop exercise, I would open the wiki and find this. Okay, show us. Oh, wait, I don't actually know where the wiki is. Or, oh, wait, I actually don't know what I would do. This is a way of surfacing that experience, if you've ever had it, of like when you first learn a language, and you go, yeah, I know all the words, I know a bit of the grammar. Okay, and then you go to have your first conversation, and you open your mouth, and you stop. Because somehow knowing all those words is not the same as having a conversation. And so that's why we need that practice to get over that moment. That's something we actually do in EMS as well. When you go to school for emergency medicine type stuff, what they do is you have a couple of different tiers of it, and the government gives you a little patch. I don't know why. You don't sew it on your uniform anyways, but it's neat. And then they say, great, the federal government says you are certified. Then you go to work, you find a job, and then they put you with a field training officer to tell you how it's actually done there. And what'll happen is the first time that you have to call ahead to a hospital on the radio, almost always I've seen, you'll know what's going on with the person. You'll know all the ways that you need to intervene here. But so often I've seen folks, when you key up the radio, they'll freeze. And about that time, a good field training officer will reach into their pocket, and they'll hand you a card, and it's laminated, and it has blanks, and you read the card and fill in the blanks to get your message across. That's what happens, and it happens to everyone, and that's part of what makes on-call scary, or you say, well, I don't know I'm on-call. It's because they don't know what to say. They don't know how to do these things. They don't know all this. Practice is the place to teach them. This is a whole separate skill. Responding to emergencies is completely different than writing code. It is unfair to expect people to translate one from the other. It's like if you said, oh, you're really good at oil painting. You must be great at bicycle racing. It's about the same thing, and yet we do it all the time. So, contrary to what I'd like to do in everyone else, I'm not going to leave you with a list of PDFs. I will leave you with a link to these slides, and then also you'll see a link to a recorded workshop about how do you do game days, how do you do practicing, more about these sorts of things, how do you practice. And if you really don't believe me that everyone does ICS differently, you can read that at the bottom. So I guess I maybe snuck one PDF in there on you. I think that's okay though. And I hope that you folks will go out, plant this seed, give yourselves time to practice and grow, and talk to me after or ask questions in the Slack if you need help. Thank you.